Dr. Vikas?
Yes, sir. Just a second, sir. Now it will come.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I hope you
fine.
can see my screen, sir.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amit. Thank you, sir.
So, central serous chorioretinopathy is a posterior segment disease which is characterized by localized and limited serous detachment. It is the fourth most common non-surgical retinopathy after ARMD, diabetic retinopathy, and venous occlusions. It's pathophysiologically, it is largely believed that there is a hyperpermeability and venous congestion of the choroidal vessels with defect in the barrier function of RPE, which leads to accumulation of fluid under neurosensory retina. The disease is usually self-limiting. However, refractoriness and the chronicity lead to permanent visual damage. Conventional laser is used in cases of refractory diseases, but however, it cannot be done in cases of subfoveal and juxtafoveal leakage. Also, it is associated with central and paracentral scotomas. PDT is a viable option in these cases, but it is related. The risk of RP atrophy, CNVM, and choriocapillary ischemia is too high with PDT. Recent studies advocate use of sub-threshold laser like 810 nanometer diode as well as 577 nanometer yellow laser. We present a study of 532 nanometers sub-threshold micropulse laser in treatment of subfoveal leaks in central serous chorioretinopathy. Just the screen is not going further forward. I'll just see.
You can use
Carry on. You carry on.
So our study was a prospective interventional study we did in 30 patients of non-resolving CSC. After proper ethical approval taken from hospital's ethical committee, we included patients of vision loss for more than 3 months duration with subfoveal leaks on FFA of more than 18 years of age. We analyzed our result at the end of 1 month, 2 and then 3 months with a p-value of less than 0.05 to be regarded as significant. Best corrected visual acuity was recorded on ETDRS letter visual acuity score, and to quantify the data, we converted into logMAR. Contrast sensitivity was recorded by Paley-Robson chart, and to rule out the chronicity, we did fundus autofluorescence. To localize the lesion, to localize the site of the leakage, fundus fluorescence angiography was done, and for central macular thickness, macular thickness map was used, and we calculated the neurosensory detachment height by using caliper, which was provided in the analysis tools. We used the 532 nanometer micropulse laser, and a 5x5 grade confluent spot was put over the area of focal leak using 5% threshold power. We measure our outcome as a primary measure was best corrected visual acuity and sensitivity at 3 months follow-up. And secondly, measure were detachment and central macular thickness. Most of the patients lie in 30 to 40 years of age. This particular chart shows change in the best corrected visual acuity. As we can see, at the end of 3 months, most of the patients had visual acuity less than 6/12 or better. Similarly, on the chart on the right side shows continuously increase in the visual acuity at 3 months post STMP laser. Similarly, neurosensory detachment height was calculated, and at the end of 3 months, almost all the patient has less than 300 microns of neurosensory detachment height, which also can be seen on the right side of the graph that it is there is continuous decrease over a period of 3 months post STMP laser. Similarly, for the central macular thickness, this particular table shows there was a significant detachment in CMT post STMP laser.
Yeah, thank you.
532 nanometer sub-threshold
Dr. Sharma, thank you. That was
safe
a
and
Thank you.
nice presentation on your part.
Thank you so
I'm
much.
afraid we are not able to finish the presentation.
Dr. Sharma, I have two questions.
Sir.
You do not have a group for comparison. How could you attribute this to your therapy, the resolution of the edema to your therapy?
Sir, we did that comparison on the basis of decrease in CMT and neurosensory detachment, sir, at the end of 1 month and 2 months. Like
The
we-
natural
baseline
history of
picture.
CSR, the natural history of CSR is that
That's
it
why
gets
we
resolved
take-
on its own.
Sir, that's why we take those cases only though those who did not resolve in 3 months of time. So non-resolving CSR cases were taken, sir.
Did you have any chronic cases?
So
Did you have
basically in the
Yes,
initial
Single or multiple leak criteria was checked.
only one single leak patients were taken, sir, and also the leak was subfoveal in those patients,
And,
in which conventional laser couldn't be used, sir.
This was supported by any sort of medical treatment.
No, sir.
So in previous 3 months,
Previous 3 months we only included those were not given any kind of treatment, as the patient's age was 30 to 40 years of age. Most of the patients were falling in that particular criteria. So we were hoping for a natural resolution of CSR, and also the leak was subfoveal. So we did not want to try any conventional treatment in that, sir.
These are all subfoveal cases, or you have something
All subfoveal
extrafoveal or
cases.
juxtafoveal?
All
All
subfoveal.
subfoveal cases.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay,
Nice
thank you.
presentation. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Dr. Sanchari Sarkar, you can share your screen.
Can you see me? Yes, Dr. Sanchari.
Dr.
You can start.
Sanchari, you're audible and visible. Kindly start off.
Yeah.
Ma'am, am I visible?
You're
Yes.
audible and visible. Kindly start.
You can see your slides. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Shantare Sarkar presenting before you efficiency of intravitreal ranibizumab in retinal vein occlusion, monthly versus PRN versus TNE protocol. Retinal vein occlusion is the second most common form of retinal vascular disease, which leads to vision loss owing to macular edema and ischemia. Nowadays, intravitreal anti-VEGFs have been the first-line treatment option for improving visual outcomes in RVO. In our study, we tried to study the efficiency of intravitreal ranibizumab in treatment of RVO via these 3 different protocols, and to compare the visual gain among patients of RVO post-IVR treatment, and also to determine the extent of resolution of edema and assess the economic burden among the patients in terms of average number of injections received. It was a randomized prospective cohort study, which was conducted between patients of more than 18 years of age with visual impairment due to macular edema secondary to RVO. Routine ophthalmological examination was done along with a SD-OCT analysis to determine the disease activity in terms of macular edema at each and every visit. The patients were divided into 3 groups, A, B, and C, which were treated according to monthly PRN and TNE protocol respectively. In group A, injection were given monthly irrespective of disease activity till 6 months. In group B, after first initial 3 monthly doses, further doses were given only upon fulfilling the retreatment criteria. And in group C, after first dose, the follow-up period was extended by 2 weeks at each visit, and next dose were given only upon fulfilling the retreatment criteria. The criteria we followed was an increase in CMT of more than 100 micrometer, any appearance of new SRF or IRF, and a decline in visual acuity of more than 1 line. 81 eyes of 81 patients were studied with an average age of 58.61 years, and there was no significant gender disproportion noted. The mean decrease in CMT was almost was statistically significant in all the 3 groups, with highest being in the monthly group 236 micrometer, followed by the TNE and then PRN. The improvement in BCVA was almost similar in both the groups, monthly and TNE, around 5 lines, and it was around 3 lines in PRN. And lastly, about the average number of injections received, it was highest in monthly, about 6, followed, and it was lowest in TNE, about 2.89. It is the OCT representations of 3 groups from 3 patients from 3 respective groups, showing the improvement in BCVA as well as resolution of edema compared to baseline. According to our previous study showed, there was no significant difference noted between the CMT or visual acuity between month 7 and month 15. But in our study, we noted significant differences in both the parameters, and it was higher in monthly than PRN or TNE. And during Horizon trial, the patients who had been in Bravo study received an average of 2.8 injections, and while those from Cruise study received a mean of 3.8 injections. But in our study, the monthly protocol received 6 injections, while the TNA received 2.89 injections. Therefore, we tried to study the response to various treatment regimes, differing in frequency of administration of IVR, and tried to maximize the treatment benefit and minimize the economic burden among the patients. A small sample size and short duration of follow-up were some of our limitations. To sum up, monthly time proved to be the most significant, showing maximum reduction and improvement in VCVA. But looking at our socio-economic picture of our country, TNE can be a favorable option, requiring the least amount of injections, but almost similar visual outcome as monthly. Thank you, sir.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
All RVO were all CRVO, or you included BRVO also? Number one. And number two, what data you shown are at the same follow-up or different follow-up?
Sir, we have included both BRVO and CRVO. And for this study, we have taken only RVO as a criteria. We have not tried to differentiate our results in the light of BRVO or CRVO. We have taken RVO as a whole. We have both BRVO and CRVO. A maximum percentage were definitely BRVOs.
But you have not used that variable for any analysis, right?
No, sir. In this study,
because mechanism for both the things are different. No?
Yes, sir. We have planned to do a next project on that aspect, but here we have taken RVO as a whole.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes,
See, you can't compare both CRVO and both BRVO in the same way, because totally the pathogenesis and all the things totally different. That is one thing. So ideally, you should differentiate between the group BRVO and group CRVO. That is one thing. Second thing, another thing is that what you mentioned, that the number of injection and thing. There are so many studies out there where they have used one injection, after that PRN, one injection after that PRN. Or most of the studies, they have concluded that the number of injection is much less, and with a equivalent result. Okay, so I think you should suppose you taking care of the versus mentioning the economic part. I think this subgroup also you should include.
Okay, sir.
And
Sure,
another
So that
thing,
variable has to be considered.
and it's a long disease. It is not a very short period. Okay, you should.
Okay, anyway, thank you, Dr. Sanchari.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the presentation. We'll go to the next one. Dr. Sayan. Ready? Dr. Sayan Ghosh.
Sir, good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning. Yes.
So 1 second, sir. Am I visible?
Please go ahead, Dr. Ghosh.
Sayan, go ahead.
A very good morning to my respected seniors and my dear colleagues. Our study is a prospective study on additional therapy to prevent resistance to anti-VEGF to diabetic macular edema. More than 95 million of diabetic retinopathy patients all over the world, anti-VEGF and laser has been the standard methods of treatment. But DME is like more than 600 microns with CMT. The refractoriness to costly anti-VEGF is increasing visual disability, and it is causing loss to compliance to follow-up. So actually, VEGF is actually one arm of the DME mechanism. There are other arms of biochemically, like reduced antioxidant level in the capillary wall or RBC morphology changes. We postulate to simpler interventions like vitamin B or C supplementation to target these arms. Our study is a prospective comparative triple-blind randomized control trial. The duration of the study is 9 months. And the design of the study, after recruitment from a retina clinic of a tertiary care center, baseline serum VEGF, baseline serum vitamin C, RBC G6PD, and other RBC parameters have been measured. Both the groups have been provided monthly IBR. One have been with B complex and other with the placebo tablet. The monthly follow-up has been done and analysis with the R software. Among the inclusion criteria, DME more than 600 micron, and among the exclusion criteria, vitamin deficit levels at the baseline and RBC polymechanisms have been excluded. These are the important confounding factors have been dealt with. In the results, the responder group is with the 5-letter recovery in logMAR chart. And in this demographic data, the more important is the PPBS on the higher side and HbA1c on the higher side has been found in the huge DNA. The responder group analysis, there is a peak in the response and there is a plateau. Vitamin B, vitamin C, and vitamin B, both the groups are showing more response than the placebo groups. Now coming to this slide, this is a very interesting electron microscopic photograph. This is the supplemented group and this is the placebo group. So with the supplemented group showing regular morphology of RBC, where there are more spikes and stickiness of the RBC morphology in the non-supplemented group. Coming to the oxidation damage level, ROS and MDA, the malonyl diamine and reactive oxygen species, is the oxidation arm, and the NADH, NADH level, D6PD and glutathione peroxidase, this is the antioxidation arm. But we found that the oxidation damage is more in the placebo group, and antioxidant level is more in the supplemented group. Similarly, in the RBC morphology group, what we found that there are 2,3-DPG level in the RBC surface roughness, and osmolytic capacity of the RBC, these have been measured, and all these RBC deformities have been more found in the placebo group, where the vitamin B/C supplemented are showing less changes, and all these P's are actually statistically significant. Coming to the discussion part, what diabetes does, there is a disbalance in the ROS generation, the reactive oxygen species generation, as well as the antioxidant capacity, causing an oxidative imbalance, causing lipid peroxidation, RBC membrane damage, and which is causing tissue hypoxia and increased VEGF. So actually anti-VEGF targets this downstream parameter, and what we are targeting the upstream parameter, so the VEGF is released in a reduced manner. The limitations is that the DRC curve for vitamin C supplementation, we couldn't measure. The RBC morphology requires more standardizations. We didn't have the software. And take-home message would be vitamin C and B can be an effective supplementation to counter anti-VEGF resistance, but anti-VEGF may have a confounding factor in the hyperosmotic characteristic and surface properties of the RBC. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you so much. This is really interesting. And but how can you tell when you are giving already anti-VEGF,
Yes.
along with just with a placebo and your vitamin B and C?
Yes, sir.
How statistically significant your case is?
Pardon, sir?
You are already giving anti-VEGF, the standard treatment for diabetic macular edema.
Yes, sir.
It's just gold standard right now. So you are already giving that. Along with that, you are using vitamin C and vitamin B complex. Correct?
Yes.
Just to facilitate that your general milieu. Now, how do you prove this?
He has a placebo group also, sir.
Yes, sir. I have a control group of placebo.
Correct. You show me what is your result there?
Sir, my result is that the antioxidation damage due to diabetes has been reduced by vitamin B and C supplementation. We have excluded all those patients with baseline vitamin deficits. So all the patients having at least more than baseline level, then we starting the treatment, vitamin B and C. We are measuring the oxidation arm and the antioxidation arm. The antioxidation arm is more active in the supplemented group, whereas in the oxidation arm is more active in the placebo group. And similarly, RBC morphology changes.
You have taken all these serum levels.
Yes, sir.
In all the groups.
Okay, good.
So did you have a comparison of serum level of like anti-VEGF and all in
Yes,
all
sir.
groups, and
Yes,
then
sir.
find out the statistics with the statistical test, that is there any significance in that?
Sir, serum VEGF level we have measured for both the placebo group and the treatment group, and we have tried to compare it with the response level, the responder group and non-responder group. It is a multiple regression analysis. What we can see, there is a relation with the serum VEGF level, but how it is being confounded by the antioxidation and oxidation arm, for that we required a more sample. Our software couldn't find it out. At least more than 500 sample we required, sir.
Did you consider lipid level here?
Yes, sir. The lipid level,
And
the lipid peroxidation level, the antioxidant mechanisms.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure, sir.
Next speaker, Dr. Praneeth.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Please share your slides.
Yes. Are my slides visible, sir?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to present on type 1 retinopathy of prematurity, analysis of incidence, risk factors, and treatment outcomes. Retinopathy of prematurity is a vasoproliferative disorder of the developing retina in infants born prematurely and is a leading cause of preventable blindness in children. The incidence of any ROP varies from 9.4 to 56% in studies conducted in several parts of the world, and that of type 1 ROP, also known as severe ROP, which needs treatment, varies from 1.8 to 28.8%. Then in India, with improvement in economic status, the availability of neonatal care has reached district places and small towns, thus increasing the survival of the premature infants. In this study, we aim to report the incidence of type 1 ROP and the results of its treatment in a hospital based in North Karnataka that mainly serves rural population. We also aim to study risk factors for the development of type 1 ROP among our cohort. This was a one-year prospective study conducted across the calendar year 2019, where all the preterm infants screened at NICUs and those being referred to the ophthalmology department were included. We followed the Government of India guidelines as per the Rashtriya Bal Swasthya Karyakram to include all the infants, and included infants born with either birth weight less than 2 kgs or gestation age at birth less than 34 weeks. We also included infants with birth weight less than or more than 2 kgs and gestation age 34 to 36 weeks with other comorbidities as advised by the guidelines. The examination was done at the chronological age as guided by the guidelines. The anterior segment examination was done initially, followed by dilated fundus examination. In those babies diagnosed with type 1 ROP, the treatment was given with laser photocoagulation and intravitreal anti-VEGF injections. Coming to the results, of the 263 infants screened in the study, any stage ROP was seen in 64 infants, that is 24.3%, of which 15 progressed to type 1 ROP, that is 5.7%, mandating treatment, and the rest regressed over the follow-ups. By univariate analysis, low gestation age, low birth weight, maternal hypertension, apnea of prematurity, PDA and its management, sepsis, bag and mass resuscitation, oxygen therapy for more than 7 days and more than 5 blood transfusions were found significant. And by multivariate analysis, birth weight, maternal hypertension, bacterial sepsis, and more than 5 blood transfusions were found significant. The incidence of any ROP varies from 19 to 32% in studies conducted from India, which is comparable to the incidence of 24.3% in our studies. The average gestation age and birth weight of these cohorts were also comparable to our study. The incidence of type 1 ROP in our study was 5.7%, which is comparable to the study by Freitas et al. And Bus et al. And Quinn et al., that is TR-ROP. To conclude, our study has reported low incidence of type 1 ROP compared to other studies from India, probably because of higher birth weight and gestation in our cohort. All the cases of type 1 ROP showed regression of the disease after treatment, emphasizing the early detection and prompt treatment of type 1 ROP. These are my differences. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pranit.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me, these are your stage type 1 ROP, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, how many cases you had total?
We had 15 cases, sir. Total 263 cases, of which 64 cases developed any ROP, of which 15 cases progressed to type 1 ROP.
15 cases progressed to type 1. Is
Yes,
these
sir.
15 cases, is there any further progression to type 2 or type 3?
No,
In this
sir.
case-
There was no further progression, sir. We treated them immediately, sir.
No. In this 15
There was no
cases,
progression to type 2, sir.
no progression.
No
So for
progression.
type 1 anyway, you are not going to do any treatment. It's not that.
Yes, sir.
So what is the significance of the study?
Sir, the study was mainly to find the incidence of type 1 ROP in this rural population in North Karnataka, sir. Several studies have been conducted, even Kid Drop study has been conducted in Karnataka, but neither studies included North Karnataka, sir. So this was to find the incidence in North Karnataka and also to find the significance of the treatment, sir. All cases regressed by laser treatment. In 2 cases, we have given intravitreal ranibizumab injection, but in those cases,
My question is that your stage 1,
yes, sir.
in these cases, why you treat?
No, he's
Type
he's
1,
talking
sir.
about type 1, not stage 1. Type 1 is the APROP, which grows very rapidly.
Okay.
So it's a very
So,
aggressive disease.
What is it? This type 1.
Yes,
And in these cases, how many cases, different stages? You have to tell that, no?
it does not have, they do not follow the classical staging system, sir. Satyam, sir. It's a very
Now
aggressive
that is
posterior
confusing
ROP.
thing, because only staging, only typing is not useful if you do not do the staging, because it will give a the data will not be perfect. Anyway, that's the
Anyway, but let me
one quick question, sir. Have you used the use of surfactant?
No,
This
sir.
factor have you because this is
Yeah, we have evaluated for surfactant, sir, but there was only one infant in which surfactant was used and it did not develop any ROP, sir.
okay, because this is a very important factor.
see let me tell you one thing, Dr. Praneeth. This is interesting. Your incidence of type 1 ROP, if it decreases, it is because of the NICUs, being sensitized about ROP and the uses of oxygen and all other things.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think time is over. We'll move on to Dr. Shruti Ladda.
Yes, sir.
Shruti, are you present? Please start your presentation.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Yesu.
Okay, is my screen visible?
Yeah, it is. You can make it full screen and start.
Yeah, okay. So good morning, everyone. I'll be presenting today on comparison of the documenting the treatment response to VEGF in wet AMD, OCT angiography with structural OCT. Now, as we all know, OCT angio is a novel, non-invasive technology that rapidly images the blood vessels in vivo. Studies have shown that OCT angio is a significant tool in documenting the treatment response to anti-VEGF. But none of these studies have simultaneously compared the ability of structural OCT and OCT angiography in documenting the treatment response in wet AMD patients, particularly in Asian populations. So the question arises, if we have structural OCT, do we really need OCT angio for documenting the treatment response? The purpose of his study was to determine the ability of structural OCT versus OCT angio in documenting the treatment response to anti-VEGF in wet AMD patients. We conducted a retrospective study with sample size of 40 eyes recruited over a period of 10 months. Heidelberg Spectralis was used for this machine. 40 treatment naive eyes with active CNVM were selected. Baseline OCT angio and structural OCT were done for all these patients. 3 intravitreal anti-VEGF bevacizumab was given monthly, and monthly monitoring of treatment response by OCTA and structural OCT were done. Evaluation of the treatment response, structural OCT criteria were reduction in the subretinal and intraretinal fluid, reduction in the height of PD, and reduction in number of hyperreflective dot. And the above image is anti-VEGF OCT, structural OCT prior to giving anti-VEGF injection, where there is evident intraretinal fluid, subretinal hyperreflective material, and CNVM complex. In the below image, 1 month after giving anti-VEGF injection, there is evident reduction in the intraretinal and subretinal fluid, reduction in the subretinal hyperreflective material, as a reduction in the CNVM activity. OCT angio criteria for treatment was reduction in the area of neovascular complex, reduction in the number of anastomosis, and conversion of immature to mature vessel configuration. The first images of OCT angio prior to giving anti-VEGF injection, where the CNVM complex area is 3.22 mm square. 1 month after giving anti-VEGF injection, the area was 1.8 mm square, along with there is evident reduction of the anastomosis and conversion of immature to mature vessel configuration. Following were exclusion criteria, non-AMD CNVM, other ocular disease which can alter the interpretation, like the hypertensive or diabetic retinopathy, or inability to capture a good quality image, as in macular hemorrhage or high myopia. We found that structural OCT detected signs of treatment response in 90% of cases, whereas OCT angio detected treatment response in 92.5% cases. Statistical analysis showed that there is no significant difference in the ability of structural OCT and OCT angio in documenting the treatment response. Coming to discussion, we can see in recent year, few studies published in some established journals have emphasized that OCT angio is a very important tool for monitoring the treatment response. But none of these studies have compared OCT angio and structural OCT simultaneously. In this study with significant larger sample size, we found that there is no significant difference in OCT angio and structural OCT and documenting the treatment response to anti-VEGF in wet AMD patients. So the conclusion of a study, though OCT angio is more sensitive to structural OCT, but both are equally reliable to document the treatment response to anti-VEGF injection in wet AMD patients. Here are my references.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So you do not see any difference between OCTA and SD-OCTA.
I think we have not taken any other variables in consideration.
It's a good study, Dr. Shruti. I think it was well thought out, and it is intuitive to understand why you're measuring the same thing by two different, essentially the same technology, but in a different manner. So while the results are intuitive, I'm glad you performed this study, because as you mentioned earlier, this type of comparison, head-to-head comparison, has not been done. So I think you are showing quite conclusively, at least in this indication, the limited role of OCTA versus just an OCT-B scan.
Definitely a role in diagnosis. The initial diagnosis, the planning for treatment is more important.
Yes, but for progression, probably it has a little.
Yeah.
What was the sample size?
40 eyes.
40 eyes, it is difficult to control, and it's a good study.
I think it's the largest study, so it's good. Okay, if there are no questions, we'll move on to Dr. Pushkar Dheer. Dr. Pushkar Dheer, can you?
Is it there?
Are you here? Dr. Dheer is present?
No.
Okay, if he's not present, we'll move
No,
on.
he's not present.
Okay. Dr. Divya Gupta.
Dr. Pushkar, you can announce at the end again if he has logged in. So,
yeah.
Dr. Divya Gupta, please.
I'm afraid Dr. Divya Gupta is also not present. We'll have to
Next
move
presentation.
Dr. Nikita and Panakkal.
Dr. Nikita, are you there?
Yeah, Dr. Nikita is.
Yes. Dr. Nikita, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Please tell your free paper number also to all the judges.
So Dr. Nikita, free paper number 1898. You're audible and visible. Please start off with your presentation.
Dr. Nikita, you're not audible. Or is it a problem with me?
Dr. Nikita, kindly unmute yourself. Yeah. Go ahead.
And the timer can be started.
Laser therapy, the gold standard procedure for halting the progression of retinopathy of prematurity. Retinopathy of prematurity is a potentially blinding vasoproliferative disorder. It is caused by abnormal development of retinal blood vessels. Treatment of retinopathy of prematurity today consists of peripheral retinal ablation by cryotherapy, laser photocoagulation, and vitreoretinal surgery for retinal detachment. Now, various types of laser have been reported for treatment of retinopathy of prematurity. This includes argon green laser, frequency doubled Nd:YAG green laser, and diode laser. Diode laser is preferred over other lasers as the chances of development of cataract post-therapy is comparatively less than with others. Now, this is a prospective observational study. Study duration is 18 months. And inclusion criteria, all infants diagnosed with retinopathy of prematurity. The exclusion criteria, anterior segment pathologies and posterior segment pathologies other than ROP. So neonates were screened for ROP, and those neonates requiring laser treatment were identified. Laser was performed. Here we used frequency doubled Nd:YAG laser, and follow-up was done for 4 months. Detailed ophthalmoscopic findings during each follow-up visit was recorded to assess the status of disease. Now, observation and results, a total of 210 eyes of 111 infants were included. Out of this, 150 eyes showed spontaneous regression. 60 eyes of 33 infants required laser treatment. So following laser ablation, 56 eyes out of 60 eyes showed regression.
out of which 54 eyes required just one laser session, whereas 2 eyes required 2 laser sessions for regression. 4 eyes with zone 1 stage 3 ROP showed progressions to stage 4A even after laser treatment, and vitreous hemorrhage was noted in 2 eyes after laser therapy. In 2018, Nikwara ST demonstrated a regression of 88.09% in lasered eyes following diode laser therapy. In my study, it was 93.33% following the frequency double Nd:YAG laser. Of these, 175 eyes showed regression after one session. Vitreous hemorrhage was a noted complication following laser therapy in a similar study conducted by Singh SR in 2019. The conclusion: laser is an effective means to stop the progression of ROP when intervened timely. However, strict follow-up is required even after laser ablation to detect progression as well as complications. Thank you.
Thank you.
You don't have a comparative group. You are just talking about laser, and moreover, your 4 cases of zone 1 ROP have failed post laser. Could you analyze that? And did you offer any alternative treatment to laser in such cases?
So, anti-VEGF and vitrectomy.
I have a question. In how many baby having anter-segment neovascularization, and those baby, have you you use same green laser, or those particular babies you have excluded?
Sorry, sir, your voice is breaking, please, sir. Can you?
Okay. So how many baby having anter-segment neovascularization? Those baby, have you excluded, or you have used same green laser?
So there was no anterior segment neovascularization in any of them, sir.
No anterior segment. And okay, very good. And the second is the how many per session, how many number of burns have you put? Any limit?
No, so the avascular retina, the
No.
complete
See, what is your maximum number of burns? Because if it is stage 2 anterior, or if it is stage 3, if it is stage 3, say hardly 1500 burns is enough. If it is stage 2, you it's required much more laser. Okay, so is there any limit per day? Have you any limit per day laser burns?
So that's usually not done, sir. Probably
I think she has done. I think in her study, only almost all these cases they have done in one setting. Maybe a few cases only they need a second setting where the laser was not working properly. Is not that? So
Yes,
how many cases you did a second setting?
2 cases.
2 cases. So apart from 150 cases you did, only 2 cases you need second setting. Is not that?
Dr. Nikita, you have a very straightforward conclusion. So, do you have any laser as effective means of treatment in the ROP established one? Any other specific message you would like to give to our audience regarding your study?
Sorry, sir.
Your conclusion is very straightforward. Laser is an effective means of treatment in ROP. So, would you like to give any other additional information to your audience?
No, sir. Even after laser, it's very, very important to follow up the patient because it's not necessary that.
That's true for all ROP cases. Any other information that you'd like to give, like any frequency of
this is a well-known fact. Anything new added with the study? That's what is us.
Any complication, anything, any other information?
Nice.
Thank you. It's a good study. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Pushkar Dheer is here? No. Dr. Divya Gupta? No. Then we'll move on to Dr. Vishwambara Satpathy. Dr. Vishwambara, are you here? Okay, the next is Dr. Jyotish.
Yes, sir.
Please go ahead.
So my slides are visible.
Yeah, you can start it on the first slide.
Go to the first slide. Go to your first slide. Yes.
Respected judges and esteemed delegates, very good morning. My topic of presentation is OCT angiography and OCT finding with reference to final visual outcome. With no financial disclosure. Central serous chorioretinopathy is a sporadic disease of unknown etiology characterized by serious detachment of neurosensory retina and retinal pigment epithelium in posterior pole of eye. The condition was first described by Von Griffey in 1866 and by Gass in 1967. It was considered as pachychoroid clinical spectrum of disease due to its choroidal thickness and vasculature. The OCT and OCT are important investigation modalities for the confirmation of diagnosis and quantification of the serous accumulation and documentation of pattern of choroidal blood flow. The visual prognosis is usually dependent on the presenting visual acuity, duration of symptom, OCT, FFA, and OCTA feature, and presence of risk factor. My study was a prospective institution-based observation study conducted in Regional Institute of Ophthalmology, SCB Medical College, Cuttack. The duration was 6 months from October 2019 to March 2020. 45 eyes were taken and enrolled in my study irrespective of age, sex, and clinical variation. The enrolled patient following routine ophthalmological evaluation underwent special investigation of OCT and OCTA for the confirmation of diagnosis and further management. And the observation of visual outcome at first visit and 6 months were done irrespective of outcome, chronicity. Newly diagnosed cases of CSCR irrespective of duration were taken in inclusion criteria. And previous episode of CSCR condition mimicking CSCR and medial opacity impairing the OCT image quality are excluded. The main demographic and clinical findings of study patients are patient having and the number were 44, in which male were 39, females were 5. The age group in year mean plus minus standard deviation was 42.6 plus minus 11.4. The acute CSR patient were taken 34 and chronic CSR patient were taken 11. The previous treatment of chronic CSR given received with no treatment were 7, which is around 63.6%, and received intravitreal injection of bevacizumab were 4, which is around 36.3%. Risk factor associated of maximum in my study was of stress, which is contributing about 41%. And this is a table depicting SD-OCT finding in percentage at day 0 and day 180, and OCTA finding at day 0 and day 180 of acute CSCR and also of chronic CSCR. Then the table depicting best corrected visual acuity of our study, in which the mean vision at day 0 and day 180 of acute CSR showing a p-value of clinically significant, and chronic CSR also the p-value was clinically significant. So coming to discussion, CSCR is certainly multifactorial disease, complete interaction of unknown and genetic factor occur. In our study, the male predominance was there, and mean age was 42.6, which is also correspond with the various previous study. And SD-OCT finding analyzed with 6 months shows resolution of around 75 to 94% of all parameter, but resolution range in chronic CSR was about 24 to 32%, which is also correlating with some previous studies. OCT finding analyzed in CSCR at 6 months shows significant resolution of around 92%, while in chronic CSCR the resolution was 18%. The OCT distinguishes the type 1 CNV with chronic CSCR. The visual outcome is better in acute CSCR than chronic CSR, which was corresponding with SD-OCT and OCTA finding. So concluding my study, the initial and final VA in acute and chronic CSR correspond with SD-OCT and finding are like thinning of inner choroidal layer and IOS layer, ERM disruption, and cystoid degeneration is having poor visual final outcome, and OCT finding like choroidal flow and so the important SD-OCT and OCT are the best model for determining the visual potential of CSR patients. This is my conclusion, sir.
So did you do a case-to-case analysis, isn't it?
Yes.
So did you find any specific difference between the two procedures, OCTA and OCT, in terms of prognosis or treatment plan? In terms of
Yes, sir.
did you get any difference in treatment planning and prognosis outcome in OCTA and OCT analysis? Would you like to comment on anything? Could you get my point?
Yes, sir.
I think in other words, do we study the variable of acute and chronic CSR, or we are studying the OCT, SD-OCT and OCTA?
So, in both acute and chronic, both were covered under OCT and OCTA, sir. So it's like what we are getting in OCT there in acute and chronic, CSR, at the time of presentation, which was varying and having resolved at the time of presentation 6 months. So it was there like the finding with acute were mostly resolved, but in chronic with those significant things have not resolved much and having poor visual outcome compared to acute one.
Yeah, could you note anything in those cases where you injected anti-VEGF in CSR cases?
Yes, sir. Comparatively, I have shown that percentage was not that much better with
no, in respect to the OCTA and the OCT, what you talked about.
Yes, sir. So in the chronic cases only they have taken that anti-VEGF. In those cases, so the reduction is much better, sir. The visual prognosis was improved better.
Can we go for the next presentation, please?
Dr. Parikshit Dhir, is he there? Dr. Divya Gupta?
They are absent, it seems.
Dr. Bishwambar Satpathy? Dr. Yusra?
Yes.
Our last speaker. Yeah, please go ahead, Dr. Yusra.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Is my screen visible, sir?
Yeah, it is. Please start.
A very good morning to everyone. I would be presenting the subretinal cannula wriggling out of it case. This is the story of a 49-year-old male who presented in our outpatient department with diminution of vision in his right eye for 6 months. He also had history of episodes of pain and redness in his right eye. On taking him up for slit lamp examination, we found evidence of anterior uveitis in his right eye with presence of over 180-degree posterior synecdoche, pigment on the surface of an early cataractous lens, a not very well dilating irregular pupil, and 2+ flare. His left eye examination was not remarkable. He had a best corrected visual acuity of only 6/16 in his right eye, and upon performing an indirect ophthalmoscopy, we soon found out why. He had a predominantly nasal retinal detachment in his right eye with multiple holes present in the periphery. We advised a vitreoretinal surgery and a guarded prognosis, keeping in mind his undilated pupil, and advised investigations for it. However, owing to COVID and its restriction, we could take him up for surgery only a couple of days later. We first made the infratemporal port for infusion cannula, checked its position as is our standard practice. But upon starting vitrectomy, we realized that the retinal detachment had become a total bullous retinal detachment, with bulla coming up to the surface of the lens and our endolite port having gone subretinally. We tried to do a limited vitrectomy, injected PFCL to the posterior pole to flatten it, tried to do a further vitrectomy with the endolite still present subretinally, but using it as support. But at this point, we had to shift our ports to further proceed with the surgery. We now proceeded with vitrectomy, although with cluttering of ports and very absurd hand movements, it was a difficult, daunting task. After performing a nearly meticulous vitrectomy, we proceeded with fluid air exchange, and oh my, we realized our air was filling up subretinally. And upon checking, we rightfully saw that the infusion cannula had at this time gone subretinal as well. We yet again shifted ports and our infusion cannula, and again proceeded with the surgery. We had to evacuate the subretinal air along with the fluid, and then performed a fluid air exchange again. But this time, thankfully, our retina settled and we could do a full drainage. We injected silicone oil to give further support to the retina, and then did a thorough endolaser retinopexy around all the breaks. Quite a few of them were present from before, but a few of them had been made iatrogenically due to the ports having gone subretinal. We also did a complete 360-degree laser endolaser retinopexy in the periphery to have a well-settled retina postoperatively. And through our ordeal and horrors, we learned a few lessons. One, to always check the intravitreal position of the cannula before turning on infusion. However, you remember cannula can go subretinal during surgery. However, if it does happen, always maintain your calm and do not try to push instruments through, or else you can land up in bigger horrors. Shift ports immediately and try to make a direct entry rather than biplanar. And through it all, remember to go slow and you will win the race. Two other reminders: better to take a cataract consent pre-operatively and always perform indirect ophthalmoscopy just prior to surgery, especially if there's a gap. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yusra. You have just presented a complication or intraoperative complication of vitrectomy, is not that?
Yes, sir. And its management while, yes. Sir.
Anything specific regarding this? Because this is something everybody knows about this. Do you have any extra point that you want to share that this is the best way of getting out of this?
So one, that we, although we may take all precautions, we may still land up subretinally. So in this case, rather than panicking and trying to continue our surgery, it would be best to take it slow and come out of the, remove your ports, make another port, and this time make a direct entry rather than biplanar to facilitate the surgery.
Would you ever try a paracentesis and an AC maintainer instead of?
Yes, sir. So our other option was, if in this case, this was a phakic patient. So
even
it was
in
our next, yes,
even
sir.
in fakes.
Yes, sir. So even in phakics, in case this would, our retina wouldn't have settled and we would not have been able to make another port, which would not be subretinal, our next option was trying to make an entry through the anterior chamber and putting an infusion.
You had already put in 4 or 5 ports there instead of 3.
So we could see some space through which the ports could enter, which is why we did it. Yes, we
great.
had a whole studded retina. Yes, sir. Studded eye. Yes.
AC maintainer would have been better option.
So it was our next option. We were just remembering the fake status of the eye.
Came out well with this case. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So the remaining presenter, can we just recall them again? Whoever is just still not.
Dr. Pushkar Dheer, are you here? This is final call.
Absent, Dr. Pushkar.
Absent, yes.
Dr. Divya Gupta. You mark him absent.
Yes. Dr. Divya Gupta, are you here?
I think, excuse me, judges, our session is till 10 o'clock. Okay, 9:55. So we have to wait for them at least till 5 minutes before the session concludes. And if they don't come, we have to mark them absent. I mean, we have to finish the session on time. If they enter before that, and if there is time, we give them time to present. If 3 of them come before 6 minutes, we just give them 2 minutes.
So, until then, shall we have Antakshari or something?
Yeah, the backend team is continue with the discussion. Where people are there. What all has been presented, you can continue with the discussion so long.
Can we ask someone to contact them if it is possible?
Yeah, the backend team is contacted them.
Okay.
So we are trying to call them also. As you can see, the numbers are also yes, but they are not answering.
And there was
We've been trying to reach them since 9 o'clock.
Was there any prior intimation on their part?
Yeah, everybody is given prior intimation.
No, from them, that they will be late or they will be.
No, if there is an intimation, we would have known that they have informed us and we'll cancel them from.
Sure. Okay.
So give us 5 minutes.
Actually,
Let us try calling them. If anything happens, I'll update you right away.
Nikhil, try once again, Nikhil. So in the meanwhile, judges, if you all want, you can continue with the discussion of the previous posters.
In that case, we could have had a final round also.
Actually, the problem is connectivity issues.
So, presenter of paper.
Two of them are posted on COVID duties.
So virtual will be better after 5G.
Presenter of
yeah, Dr. Mayor.
Presenter of free paper 994 is there, Mr. Sayantan Bush.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm here, sir.
Okay. Sayantan,
So we look forward to extension of your study.
Yes. I just wanted to know about your study. You studied vitamin B and vitamin C primarily, is that it?
Yes, sir.
So did you study, did you think vitamin D also plays a role in these cases?
Sir, we actually, this study was in collaboration with an endocrinology department. So they are having some back-end studies on diabetes. So we tried to find out what are the factors in the oxidant and antioxidant balance. And we found out that vitamin B and C can be easily targeted because this ROS change is going on all over all microvasculatures in the body. But it is only effective, the B and C is only found to be effective in the retinal microvasculature. They tried it in the kidney, they tried for the pulmonary changes, even for the hepatologic changes, but it was not so effective. The dialysis, rate of dialysis, the time of dialysis had not been changed. But in only our cases, in fact, we have a bigger study before that, so that we can understand what are the prognostic factors for anti-VEGF, ranibizumab. So we found out the factor most important, probably we are missing some arms of treatment. I mean, VEGF is targeting downstream, we can target upstream. So the similar mechanisms have been used by the nephrologists for diabetic kidney changes, end-stage kidney disease. And they found out that vitamin B and C, D, none of them are much more effective. So they are trying to have directly antioxidant put into the kidney. So found out that D is not so effective, so we didn't go with D, sir.
And regarding your electron microscope pictures, what was the actual conclusion from those pictures?
Sir, I want to stress, as the time was short and the slides are limited, sir, actually we found out that we tried to find out from a routine blood smear of hemoglobin, a routine blood smear of each and every patient, we did a electron microscopy. And from that blood smear, we found out that the RBC morphologic changes are quite marked, sir. They're quite marked. So the normal RBC morphology in the microvascular is from the arteriole to capillary to venules. This transition period, usually there is a laminar flow in the arterial and the venule end, not in the capillaries. But arterial and venular has a laminar flow. This laminar flow is actually facilitated by the regular morphology of the RBC. RBC shouldn't get disformed before entering into the capillaries. If they get deformed before entering the capillaries, the final oxygen delivery capacity of the RBCs is hampered, which is being shown here. Because RBCs are found to be having more spikes, the RBC surface roughness is actually proportional to the RBC not following laminar flows, and they're clogging the capillaries. So this clogging is not a static clogging, it's a dynamic clogging. The clogging is getting released, but in the meantime, the oxygen delivery to the tissues is affected, which is causing the hypoxia and which is causing the VEGF release.
Is it somehow related with your vitamin level in those patients, ANC level in these patients?
Sir, vitamin levels, we have used direct vitamin levels and we have used proxies for vitamin levels. Like direct vitamin levels is vitamin C levels, vitamin B levels. Vitamin B has also many components. We stick on to vitamin B1 and B6 and vitamin C level. But the proxies are more statistically significant with the ROS changes, like ROS level and NADH level, especially the G6 peroxidase level, the NADH, NAD level. These are more akin to the RBC morphologic changes, to the responder group. But if we find out the vitamin C and vitamin B levels, they are not actually, the curve is not pertaining to the changes of the responder group. Probably vitamin B and C, the levels we are having as the normal is not based on the whole Indian population. Mostly these are Western data. The normal vitamin C, normal vitamin, we need a prevalence study of that so that we can understand what is the normal range, what is the standard deviation for that. Only then we will be able to compare the direct vitamin B and C level with the responder group, sir.
What was the test you used for the vitamin B and C estimation?
What is the?
how you estimated vitamin B and C?
Sir, vitamin B and C, we have 3 kits. I don't know the exact, the specifications of these kits.
You estimated in plasma or serum?
Sir, serum.
Yeah. So, which one is more reliable, plasma or serum for vitamin analysis?
Sir, sir, I don't have that amount of. Actually, that has been suggested by the endocrinologist, sir, that we should go for the serum.
He is an ophthalmologist.
No, yeah, that is why. No, his observation is a bit interesting to me. That is why I'm asking. Yeah. Anyway, thanks.
Good.
My pleasure.
Good study.
My pleasure, sir. Yeah.
I just hope that all these people have been evaluated and time you all are not remarks. Okay.
Amit, sir, your voice is breaking.
Yeah, we couldn't hear you.
I'm telling to the judges, I just hope that because we have extra time, it doesn't, you should not change your marks now by asking extra question to all the presenters. So the presenters BP should not be again raised.
No, he doesn't, he's not scoring.
It is not question of scoring. It's just
Okay. No, I am talking. Discussion is there for the people who are already been evaluated. Their marks should not be changed. Otherwise,
Definitely.
time
No,
ज़्यादा मिल गया, हमको grill कर दिया.
So I don't think others are coming, I think. What do you say, Amit?
Dr. Dhir won't be coming. Dr. Divya, no answer again. Dr. Satpathy, no answer. So two of them, we don't have an answer.
Yeah.
And as per the rules by the scientific committee, we can't close the session beforehand.
Before time.
We need to wait. Yeah, we need to wait because if they turn up last moment also, we need to take. Suppose a person comes at 9:50 and we have 5 minutes for the session to be over, then we can take one. If he comes at 9:54, then he has to present only for 30 seconds and finish it.
Just a suggestion in the meanwhile. Can I request all the presenters to switch on the camera so we could take a screenshot?
Yeah, that would be best. We can take a screenshot of our session, which has not concluded, but which is of time.
Correct.
Thank you.
And yes, we can all smile. So we'll give a 5-second timer as well. Since this is going to be the doctors, unfortunately, I'll switch off the camera.
Done, Nikhil?
So 5, 4, 3, 2, look into the camera, and that's it.
Thank you.
Done?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Satyan sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.